Hello, weirdos. Hello, weirdos. Sorry if I sound a little bit different. I got COVID and I'm in like my last kind of days of recovery. Oh my gosh, this has been such a fucking, these last couple weeks have been just rough. Not the funnest. What we're going to be talking about today is all of the books that I read in August, and August was like a really hard month for me, especially in the second half. August, I was gonna move like mid-August. So most of the books that I'm gonna be talking to you guys about, I read mid-August because I got in an accident by myself. No one was hurt but me. And I sprained my ankle, and I have a boot that I'm not wearing right now, and so that happened like literally 12 hours before I got in the car to move. So, that really curtailed a lot of my reading plans, and it's just been really, really tough and difficult for me personally because I like being able to move around, I just couldn't do stuff that I'm normally able to do. Even like now I'm just limited in what I'm able to do because of my injury. So because I was just in so much pain, I couldn't really read. It was really, really hard for me to like concentrate on things and like get stuff done that was like for pleasure. So I was watching like a lot of just like TV shows, stuff that like it doesn't really matter if you like retain the information. And with a lot of the books that I was reading at the time, like they were not set up like that. Like they do well if you can, concentrate and like read them and like retain the information. So my reading was like going really, really low, and then like went real down because of just the pain I'm in day to day. It's gotten better, and like I can move around with a boot and without a boot, but if I'm going somewhere, like I need to be wearing a boot because my ankle just gets very fatigued really fast. That happened, and then I started my new job like a week after I got my sprained ankle, to the point where like I wasn't sure like if first day of work I would be able to move around like without crutches. And so I brought my crutches to work with me, and I was carrying them around everywhere at work. But it went fine. I didn't really need them, and I haven't really needed them since. But yeah, it's just been really trying. And then I got COVID. And my brother got COVID at the same time. So yeah, it's been a rough start, to say the least. So anyway, that is enough of like kind of like life update with me. So let's just talk about the books that I read. I did manage to read 10 books, which good on me for being super proactive at the beginning of August, because yeah, that was that's how I got to 10, because I think when I was injured, I really only had to finish 2 books to get to 10, and 10's my goal every month. So yeah, we'll talk about it more when we get to those books. So yeah, I just hit my goal. So the very first book that I finished is How to Be Drawn by Terrence Hayes, and I do have a copy of this, except it's in my home in Chicago and not with me in Boston. But basically, How to Be Drawn is a poetry collection. As far as like my thoughts on it, I mean, it's poetry. I didn't really connect to it that much, but poetry really isn't my thing. I prefer like spoken poetry, and this didn't have an audiobook, so I was kind of reading it out loud, and that worked. I don't really remember what any of like the poems are about. Terrence Hayes is a black man, and so a lot of them deal with like race and stuff like that. There's some cool formatting things going on. There was like this one poem, I forget what it was called, but it was in the shape, so it was kind of like a police report. And as you kind of went through the police reports, they like kind of just, he like dismantled the idea of like the police report. I don't know. It was really interesting and really cool. That's the only one that like comes to mind because it was like formatted differently, and it was just interesting to read. So I mean, I read it because my kids have to read it. And by kids I mean students. Very, very simple reason. The next book that I finished is Sex at Dawn by Christopher Ryan and Kasidia Jetha. Yeah. This is all about the science of sex, and it's kind of looking at dismantling a lot of our ideas about monogamous sex that people in the Western world kind of hold to this ideal. And how probably if we are looking at the history of humans and looking at like autonomic, oh my god, my mom is calling me. Sorry for that interruption, that was my mom calling to check up on me. So it basically is like trying to figure out like what humans would have been like, you know, before culture has impressed all of these ideas about like marriage and sexual relations onto humans. And so it's a little bit a discussion of science, but also culture. So I just enjoyed it. I thought it was a really interesting book. And yeah, I read it because the Storygraph recommended it to me. Solid science books. I really liked it. Sometimes it was a little bit too informal for me. I often don't like in like science books or like nonfiction books where they try to take a more casual tone with me, the reader, and where it will directly address me. That's not my cup of tea. And it did that a little bit, but you know, you just kind of ignore those parts and just focus on like the science and the writing. It was a fine book. The next book that I read is Convenience Store Woman. This is by Sayaka Murata, and this is a translated piece of like Japanese, you know, fiction. It's very short. I breezed through it really fast. This was recommended to me by the Boston Public Library. And everybody like describes this book as like being really weird and really out there, and I was just kind of sitting there and I'm like, this just sounds like a book about a person who has autism. Like, it doesn't seem that like outlandish or weird or unusual to me personally. So like it didn't put me off, but just kind of like the marketing around it was just like, I was expecting something like a lot different than what I was getting, and I'm like, this just seems like a normal book just with an autistic main character and you're just in her perspective. And I don't necessarily know if that's like deliberate or just kind of what I drew from it, but that's just kind of how I felt that the character was written, intentionally or unintentionally. So yeah, I mean, I liked it. I thought it was really interesting. You have this woman who like works in a convenience store and she thrives in convenience store. She loves the routine of it. She like really gets into knowing the pattern of people who are coming in and knowing how like weather will affect convenience store and sales, and she's just really, really into it. And I'm like, to me, this person reads as autistic. And she's dealing with society who wants her to be a certain way, and it's told in this book that she's kind of always felt this way. You know, she's always like gotten into the routine and been seen as atypical from other people. And I'm like, oh, it's just because she's undiagnosed autistic. Anyway, so people start trying to pressure her into like getting a different job that's not at a convenience store, or to have a husband, or to have babies, and that's just not really her scene. And this kind of book kind of details this journey where she meets this man, and they're both kind of like he's more like counter-revolutionary, and is maybe not counter-revolutionary. His mindset is disgusting, and I don't like his mindset, but he is basically almost kind of like the alpha males that you'll see on YouTube sometimes, where he's just like, society is like X, Y, or Z, men are meant to hunt, women are meant to gather, like very like outdated like forms of thinking. And you know, you kind of, you know, views women as like sexual gratification, and he's like struggling to deal with that society. It doesn't necessarily work this way anymore, and he's really struggling with it. So yeah, I didn't particularly really like his character. I found him very distasteful. Anyway, they pair up to kind of have this relationship that appears to adhere to like societal standards. when it really doesn't. And he is trying to like pressure her into conforming more into society, and he makes her like get rid of her job at the convenience store, and she gets like really depressed. And I'm not going to spoil the ending, but I just thought it was a really interesting look, and I quite enjoyed it. Not for like the weirdness, but I just think it's because it's a narrative of an autistic character moving through the world. Like, it's just not weird. I don't know what to tell people. It's just not weird. It's just, I don't know. In my opinion, it's literally just a story of an autistic person moving through the world. The next one I read is The Girl Who Played with Fire by Steve Larson. This is the second volume in whatever big series that he wrote. I don't know what it's called. But the first one was like the girl with the like dragon tattoo. And so we learned more about our, you know, what the fuck is her name? So I read the first one a while ago, and I decided to pick this one up. And this one definitely functions less as a standalone novel. I think that the first one definitely works as like you can just read this one and you don't really have to continue on with the series. But this one feels definitely like there are unresolved questions. You learn more about like the main Leslie? It's something like that. Lysander, not Lysander. Salander is her last name. I remember that. So you're learning more about like Salander and like her past, and particularly her father and her relationship with her father. And she's basically embroiled and accused of murdering these two people. And I don't know, like I just don't think that this is my genre. I didn't hate the book, but I also just like, I don't know, I wasn't super into it the way I was into the first book. I think because it feels a lot more like it's integrated a lot more into a plot. I am reading the third one, and I don't know if I'm gonna finish the third one. I might DNF it at some point. Like, it's just, this is just not a genre for me. This like true crime things, you know, like these books are written well. They're just, I think that for me, I work better when these like stuff is all kind of like in one book and not like dragged out into a series. And this book really felt like in order to get the proper conclusion to your feelings about this book, you have to, you know, read the third one. And I know there's more beyond the third one, but I think like the author died or something before he could finish like the fourth, fifth, and sixth ones. And I just know I'm not committing to more than these first ones, to more than the third book. If I even finish that, I don't know if I will. So yeah, that is that's the Girl Who Played with Fire. So yeah, I don't know. These books aren't for me. I might be giving them to a different home in the future. Anyway, so the next book that I read is To Kill a Mockingbird. This is by Harper Lee. I don't know how like I feel about this one. You know, it is a classic of the American canon. I don't know. I felt like it was fine. It's not a book that I had to like read for class or anything. I just have like, you know, it wasn't like an earth-shattering book to me or anything. I mean, I watched the movie, I've seen the play, so I kind of know what it's about. Yeah. So most people probably know what this book about, but you're following a young girl by the name of Scout who is very much a tomboy and not wanting to adhere to what, you know, her aunt thinks that she should do, and yeah, just very much wants to kind of like live her own life. And she's growing up in a town in the South and dealing with a lot of like racial, not confusion, but she is a young white girl, and she's her father is representing this black man who is accused of raping this young white girl who he didn't do it. And she's just like very, very like confused as to what exactly she should believe, because she's hearing conflicting things at school versus at home. You know, she gets really upset when people call her father slurs like N lover, and she just gets really mad. And to a certain extent, like, I kind of, like, understood, like, where she was coming from, because she's, you know, a young girl. She hasn't really learned a lot about the world. Like, I think she's literally 7. I don't know. I kind of, like, identified with, like, a lot of that, because I remember growing up just being very confused as to how to feel about some things racially, because I was never raised to kind of judge other people, but the town I grew up in was, you know, also very racist. And you had people saying shit about other people based on their race. It's just very confusing to be hearing different messages from different people in your life, you know, from friends or from adults. And it's just a very, very confusing thing to be hearing, because, you know, you might hear from, like, your parents or some teachers that, you know, everybody's the same, you know, we shouldn't treat people differently. But then you talk to some of your friends or some of your friends' parents who are, you know, berating, you know, these people, or you hear it on the street, and it's just very confusing because you're not really sure what is right. So, I mean, but I don't know. I didn't find it super, like, transformative, or, I mean, it's a classic for a reason. It's well written. I don't know. I didn't really feel like maybe it's just because, like, our conversations that we have now about race have moved so far beyond To Kill a Mockingbird. But I don't know. I felt like some of that was, like, you know, still, like, very, very true, in terms of just the way that people demonize, like, black men in particular. Yeah, so a lot of those, like, themes are true still today, but I feel like just the conversations around them have changed, to the point where I don't necessarily know how To Kill a Mockingbird really fits into the overall conversation. Anyway, so now going on to the next book that I read, and that was The Merciless Ones. That is by Namina Forna, and this is also another sequel in a series to The Gilded Ones. You know, you learn all the stuff about this world that you think is true in the first book, and now it's this. I really like this kind of technique that authors used. So you learn all of these things to be true in the first book, right? You kind of have, like, a setting of, like, okay, this is the status quo. This is the way the world works. And in the case of the Gilded Ones, it's okay, like, men are, you know, super patriarchal society, men are the gods, you know, stuff like that. Women are super subjugated and forced to undergo, like, this ritual where they have to see if they're pure or not, basically if their blood is red or gold. And if their blood is red, they're seen as, like, impure and clean and basically murdered. And then you learn that, so that's kind of the status quo at the beginning of the book, and then you learn that, oh, it's, your blood doesn't run gold because you're, you know, bad, it's because, like, you're the descendants of, like, gods. It's a little bit more nuanced and complicated than that, but basically for this purposes of this conversation, we're going to keep it like that. And you learn that there are these female deities who have been imprisoned and subjugated by men, and you learn that there are these things called death streaks, and oh right, yep, they can only be women, blah 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 blah. Right, so at the start of the second book, that is, like, kind of the status quo now, and we're trying to free what are called the mothers, which are basically gods. And so we're going around, and in the second book, and we're following our main character of Deka as she is, you know, learning more about herself and her inheritance as she lies within this greater structure. But we're also learning that these mothers, these female gods, or goddesses that we are, you know, at bat for, we are fighting for, we are on their side, we're learning maybe they're not as good as we think they are, which I really like. So you have a total another, like, shift in the way the world works. And it's really interesting because both of these people, both of these, like, powers that are working, basically the, like, gods and goddesses are, like, fighting and trying to take control of the land for, like, power. I just really liked it. I really liked it. And Deka, like, she is so confused. She is trying to figure out what exactly is happening. you know, I just really, really like, I don't know, I just think it's really good technique to use in book, like multi-series books, fantasy books. It just, I think, adds like, I don't know, I personally like it. I don't quite know exactly what that technique is used, but I think that EmmaAbe, like the author, does a really, really good job of executing it and having it play out so well so far into these 2 books, and that, like, I wasn't expecting it. I'm just really excited to see that 3rd book and read it, and I am impatiently waiting for it to come out so I can finish this series and I can have a like understanding of like, okay, this is how the entire world works as a whole. So I'm trying to think, did I like this one better than the first one? I don't know, because I think I like what both books are doing. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. That is a good question, and I do not have the answer to that. But yeah, another solid entry in this Gilded Ones thing. I really want to tell you guys more, but I don't want to spoil things, because I think it's important to kind of have things unspoiled in this, because like, I just really like the journey that you go on with Deka, learning things about herself, about the people around her, and it's good to not know those things going in my opinion. So we are going to move on to the next book, which is The Red Nile. This is by Robert Twigger, and so this book didn't have an audiobook, and it's kind of all about the Nile, a little bit about, I was expecting this to be a little bit more scientific than it was. I think it leaned a lot more about like the history kind of surrounding places in the Nile, and I want to say I got a lot out of it, but I also like didn't really. There were times where it did get too informal that I just really didn't really gel with. And I feel like it was just rushing through a lot of historic events that I kind of feel like needed to be taken more time with and to have more nuance put in. I don't necessarily know if that's a fault of the book, because it was already pretty long as it stands, and to give it more time would have made the book even longer. Yeah, I hesitate to like say that like it was badly written, but I just wasn't clicking with it at all. I don't necessarily know if that speaks to the quality of it, but that's just kind of my experience with it. So the next book that I finished is Did That Just Happen? Beyond Diversity, Creating Sustainable and Inclusive Organizations by Dr. Stephanie Pinder Maker and Dr. Lauren Wadsworth. And this was like the first book that I'd read post-accident. I had to read this for work, so I had like 3 days before like when I read this and before work started, and I just kind of wanted to get it done. And so what it's about kind of like creating inclusive organizations, and we had to read this for like our diversity and equity people, which, so I don't know, I feel like I struggle with books like this. For the sole fact of, I think a lot of this stuff in here is very self-explanatory, you know, about things like, hey, taking the time to learn how to pronounce a person's name is, you know, impactful to a person. If you're working with them, it shows that you care, you know, stuff like that. Like, I don't know, to me this stuff seems all very like self-explanatory. I understand why they like make us do this, or make us read stuff like this, because some people it's not self-explanatory, and I think it is helpful to do that reflection in time, to be like, oh, am I doing these things that are talked about in this book? But I don't know, I felt like their like reflection pieces when thinking on like myself have been like the most helpful thing when I'm doing work like this, and I don't necessarily think that this book provides like reflection time, but it's also a fucking book. I don't necessarily know how to like integrate that. So I mean, I think that it's a fine book for what it does. Like, I'm not upset with it, you know, it doesn't do anything like super egregiously whatever. It just isn't a book that like I would reach to read if I didn't have to read it for work. Alright, so we're on the last two books. The next book that I read is Arsenic and Adobo. This is by EmmaAbe Books, and this I read. The Boston Library was doing a like summer readathon thing, and it was like a checkerboard. It was like a bingo board, and if you blacked out the bingo board, you like were entered into the drawing for like a $200 gift card for groceries. And I was like, yes, I must black it out. And I had like less than a week before I had to turn stuff in, and I was like, damn, I still need this one. And the one was like a book about food, so I decided to go with this one because I'd seen it and I was like, okay, this is like a new book and it's about food. And you know what, I actually really liked this. So this is like the first book that like I read for my pleasure outside of after my accident, basically. And it was the perfect book to pick up because it was, I don't know, it kept moving, and it wasn't a book where you really had to concentrate a lot about what was going on. You know, you could, so it's a murder mystery, but it was also very playful and fun murder mystery rather than a super serious murder mystery. This, I don't know, had a more like joyful, like youthful tone and feeling to it, and there was a lot just sort of centered around Filipino food. So I got descriptions of lots of delicious food, which sometimes wasn't fun to read in the morning on my way to work because I'd be like, oh my god, I haven't eaten anything, I'm so hungry. But I found that it was a really fun book, fun murder mystery, and it was just such a good book to pick up because it was just the right pace of what I needed at the time. Yeah, it's described as a cozy mystery, so I think that's like more up my alley if I want to read more like mystery things, at least as of right now. I like, oh my god, like the the mom and grandmother in this were driving me crazy for the sole purpose of their attitude towards talking to the police. So right there in this small town, and this food critic came, who's also happens to be the ex-boyfriend of one of the chefs of this restaurant. So he winds up dying in their restaurant, and he's poisoned by what they assume is arsenic. So everybody thinks that, you know, this one cook, the main character, murdered him, and the shop is run by the main character's like basically grandma, auntie person. I'm not remembering it exactly. Yeah, her aunt's restaurant. And so her aunt has like the attitude of like so the police come and investigate, and her aunt has the attitude of like, oh, of course, you're the police, yes, I'm going to talk to you, I'm going to give you access to all of this information. And I was just sitting there like, oh my god, do not talk to the police, like, no, like, do not talk to the police. They are the last people that you want to talk to in this situation without a lawyer present. And they just didn't get a lawyer for such a long time, and they are giving the police like free range of the kitchen, no warrant. And I was like, oh my god, no, you need to have a police present. It's fine, but it was driving me up the wall. But like, you know, that wasn't intentional, you know, that wasn't a fault of the book or like the writer, that's how the character was. And yeah, I'm just like, oh no, please do not talk to the police. And maybe I'm just watching too much like LawTube. But yes, one thing I've learned, don't talk to the police. They'll only get you in trouble. Even if you're innocent, which they end up being. And so they basically had to prove their own innocence. Oh my god. Very fun book. I really enjoyed it. And the last book that I read, I read because I was like, well, I was at 9 books. I was like, I really want to get to 10. And I think I can get to a 10th book if I read a book that's like, you know, about halfway, 40% of the way already completed. So that wound up being the Six of Crows for me. This is in the Six of Crows duology. Is it called that? And this was another one where I had just so much trouble concentrating with. I don't know why. I know a lot of people really like this, Leigh Bardugo, and I like Leigh Bardugo too. I'm just kind of thinking that I'm liking more of her adult work rather than her YA stuff, which this is her YA stuff. I don't necessarily want to say that this is a terrible book. I just had I just had such problems concentrating while reading it, which kind of hindered my enjoyment. But basically, you have this group of like criminals, people in the underbelly of society that need to pull off this heist to get a lot of money. And they all need the money for different reasons. They all have different alliances. I just didn't connect to it. I'm so sorry. I don't think this is a bad book, and I don't think that if you like it, like, you're bad or wrong or whatever. It just wasn't a book for me. I am gonna continue with this series because I do have to get to that other book series. Oh my god, I feel like, don't look at me. I don't know. Maybe if I don't know. I don't know. I just was not for me. Was not for me. I like that it involves other people, like, in the different worlds, like, well, in the same world. I like that. I don't know. I feel so embarrassed. But there you go. They're all the books that I read in the month of August. It's September 10th right now, and I've finished 2 books, so that's good. Like, leave like a band-aid or something like that in the comments down below if you don't want to comment anything. But otherwise, let me know what was the favorite book that you guys read in August. And have a wonderful rest of your week. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.